So today I thought I'd give you my honest opinion on my current rat cage. This is the Little Zoo Ventura, and I've had it I think for almost a year now, so definitely time to tell you my opinions on this. And I've done a review on every single other rat cage I've had. I say that as if I've had many rat cages. I've only had 2 others, but I wanted to share my opinions just in case you're thinking of getting this cage or you just want to be nosy and see what I think. So this cage, as I said, is the Little Zoo Ventura, and it's a large 2-tiered metal rat cage. It can also be purchased as just a single level cage, and it's a golden brown in colour, although I do believe they're also now making this available in like a charcoal or black colour, which is interesting. And the dimensions are 93 by 68 by 158 centimetres. So some information online will tell you this rat cage is suitable for up to around 14 rats. Personally, I wouldn't be comfortable having more than about 5 or 6 in this, just based on the floor space and my personal preference for how much space I like to give my rats. And right now I've got 4 boys living in this cage. This cage currently retails for around £325, and after discussing what I think and all of my pros and cons, I'll touch on whether I think it's worth this or not. So I can only really make a comparison to other cages I've tried and used with my rats in the past, and I've not tried a bunch of cages on the market. I've only really had 2 cages before this one. The first one was the Fur Plus Furret, which is cheaper, it's smaller, I've still got it in my garage. And then the one I had before this one was the Pet Planet Rat and Ferret cage, which is a very similar style cage, so I can make the most comparisons to this. And just basically my experience of using this, I'm going to go through the pros and the cons after having this cage for my rats for almost a year. So in terms of pros, the first pro is that it is a large cage. It's one of the larger cages on the market, and it goes all the way down to the floor almost. Compared to other cages such as the Pet Planet cage, that does have a big gap underneath for storing things, which can be handy in its own right. You do get a lot more space on the bottom and also a lot more space for climbing, and you can also add a deeper base and not lose too much space within the cage by doing this. Speaking of the base, the metal base this cage comes with, the metal tray at the bottom, is fairly decent. It's a lot deeper than most other cages tend to give you, and although you are still going to have to modify this and add in a perspex tray just to make it deeper and add in more bedding, initially it's not terrible. This can do for a while until you can afford or until you can order your perspex. It does hold a fair amount of bedding that a lot of other cages just can't hold. One of the pros for me personally with this rat cage is the colour. It's a nice brown colour, which is quite unique. It's not going to be to everyone's taste, but it does go really nicely with a naturalistic setup, and you're not going to find many other cages or any other cages on the market that have this colour. Most rat cages tend to be black or grey or charcoal, so this is quite unique. Also, the paintwork on this cage seems to be holding up pretty well. It has of course only been a year, but I can't see any signs of rusting after all the cleaning and use and knocking the cage around. There's not really any signs of the paint chipping off or rusting or eroding, which in other cages, like the Pet Planet cage, after like 6 months time, there was already signs of rust pretty badly, so this one is holding up pretty well. This cage also comes with 4 metal shelves and ladders, most of which I don't use to be honest, but they are there if you want them. And this is good because most big metal cages sometimes only come with 2 shelves or none at all. The way the shelves themselves attach to the rat cage is also really great and makes them super sturdy, because I've had other shelves in rat cages that just bounce around if the rats are on them or you've put things on them. These, because they physically screw to the side of the cage, it makes them super sturdy, they're not going anywhere, and they also come with a lip, which most rat cage shelves don't tend to. They tend to just be flat. These, because they have got that lip, you can add in bedding or also a mini perspex tray if you want to. The shelves also have tiny holes on them. I'm not entirely sure the purpose of these, but it has been really handy just to hang things on. One of the features I like about this rat cage, which is kind of ironic because I don't use this at all, is the middle shelf. This has a really neat design where you can either have this completely screwed shut and hold in a bunch of bedding, or you can have this open as a flap and have it as an open system, which most rat cages don't give you this, They just have the two levels, the two like shelves top and bottom, and one of them has a hole cut in, which if you want to separate the two sections, you have to block this with something like a tile or a perspex tray. So giving you that option to split the two sections, I think is really cool. Probably one of the biggest pros about this cage is it does have big double doors that both open. Some big metal rat cages, you'll buy them and then realise they only have one door that opens, the other one is fixed, and this can make cleaning and just interacting with your rats really difficult. So this cage being the way it is, it does make things slightly more difficult because you can't hang anything on the front compared to other cages, but the access in this cage is really good. The last pro that I could think of with this cage is it was really easy to put together. I've had other cages in the past, the Pet Planet cage, where it is quite tricky to get things to slot together properly, and it did also come with 2 screws missing, which is not good for a brand new cage. So this one was super easy to put together, and part of that is the instructions. They are very detailed. Some rat cages don't come with instructions, or it's just one very basic picture with no text, and you just kind of have to fend for yourself. So the instructions for this are very detailed, and that definitely helps. So moving on to the cons with this cage, the first thing that bothers me on a daily basis about this is, although it's great that it goes almost all the way to the floor, the gap underneath is big enough for the rats to go under, but not quite big enough to have both of your arms to get them if you need to. And when the rats have to come back in, that is the first place they're going to try to avoid me putting them back in the cage, so that can definitely be annoying. Another con is, although the metal tray the cage comes with is a lot bigger than other cages on the market, it's still not big enough to allow the rats to dig properly or to stop the bedding getting thrown out. So you are then going to have to spend more money than you've already just spent on this cage to make a deeper base with perspex or coroplast or something. So that is a bit frustrating. If they just made this a little bit bigger, then it could hold a lot more bedding. The biggest con for me about this cage is the fact the bars are actually quite flimsy, which you wouldn't expect for the price point, but they do move around a fair bit. And if you're hanging anything heavier than like a hammock on them, so ropes and branches, they are going to start to warp and even snap. I'm on my 3rd bar now that is completely snapped, which of course isn't good because it can poke the rats and even smaller rats might escape, so not good. This one is not the biggest issue in the world, it's just an observation based on other cages I've tried. I don't think the latch on this cage is as secure as some other cages. It basically just goes like this. It does have a double latch system where it also attaches at the top, but compared to the Pet Planet cage where you have to drag it, lift it, drag it, it's quite complicated even for humans. This one just goes like this. So there has been instances where I've not attached the top latch or even the bottom one, either or, and the rats have pushed the door open. So just make sure you're using both of the latches. Don't get lazy because they can open the door if you're just using one. My last real con about this cage is I just wish all of the bars were horizontal. They are horizontal on the front and also on the back, but mostly they are vertical on the 2 sides, so that can make climbing a lot more difficult, especially for older rats. And it does make hanging things in the cage a bit more challenging because there's not as many points to hang things from because they are just going to slip down, and the whole front of the cage you can't really hang too much anyway because it is the doors. So if this cage had horizontal bars on all 4 sides, I think that would give it a few more bonus points from me. So overall there are definitely more pros than cons when it comes to this cage, but do I think it's worth the £325 price point? I think given the fact the bars are so flimsy and the damage happened pretty quickly into owning this cage, if that entire issue was fixed, then maybe. But given that the bars are quite flimsy and I have had bars break, and I probably can expect more bars to break and need fixing in the future, I don't think it puts this cage above any of the other £200 or £250 cages on the market. Something else also worth noting is when I bought this cage brand new and I was unboxing it, there was a fair few dents and scratches on the metal trays on the inside. I wasn't too bothered about this, bothered enough to complain or send it back because it is just going to get covered in the bedding anyway. But then again, if you were to spend £325 on a phone or a laptop and it came with a scratch on, you probably wouldn't be happy. So the quality isn't quite there in some aspects, but would I buy this cage again today if I had to? I probably would, mostly for the aesthetics, but also just the size, the depth. I do really like this cage. It's that kind of thing where you complain about having an iPhone, but you will get one again next time. I do really like this cage. I do think the pros outweigh the cons, but they are still disappointing. But do let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Are you thinking of getting this cage, or have you already got it? What do you think? Do you have the same issues as I do? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!